Rachel and Henry had just moved into their dream house in the suburbs. They were excited to start their new life and had made a lot of plans for the future. One of the things they loved about their new home was their friendly next-door neighbor, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson was a kind, elderly man who always had a smile on his face. He would wave at Rachel and Henry whenever he saw them and would often stop by to chat with them. They felt lucky to have such a nice neighbor. However, one day, Rachel was reading the local newspaper and was shocked to discover that Mr. Johnson had been convicted of murder 20 years ago. The article stated that Mr. Johnson had killed a man during a heated argument and had served his full sentence. Rachel was horrified, and she immediately told Henry about the article. They couldn't believe that their friendly neighbor was actually a convicted murderer. They started feeling chills down their spines every time Mr. Johnson would wave and smile in a creepy way to them. Their discomfort increased when they started noticing strange things happening in their yard after midnight. They would hear footsteps outside their window and would see shadows moving on their lawn. They were too afraid to investigate, thinking it might be Mr. Johnson. One night, Rachel and Henry decided to confront Mr. Johnson about his past. They went to his house and knocked on his door. When he answered, they asked him about the murder. Mr. Johnson's smile faded, and he looked sad and regretful. He told them that the murder was not planned and had happened during a heated argument. He had been young and foolish, and he deeply regretted what he had done. He had served his full sentence and had been trying to live a peaceful life since then. Rachel and Henry were relieved to hear Mr. Johnson's explanation, but they were still unnerved by his creepy smile and the strange occurrences in their yard. They started locking their doors and windows at night and even considered moving out. One night, they were awakened by a loud noise outside their window. They looked outside and saw Mr. Johnson standing on their lawn, holding a shovel. They were terrified and called the police. When the police arrived, they found that Mr. Johnson had been digging a hole in their yard. He had claimed that he had lost his wedding ring and was trying to find it. However, Rachel and Henry were convinced that he was trying to do something more sinister. After that night, Rachel and Henry moved out of their house, unable to live next to a convicted murderer, no matter how friendly he seemed. They never forgot the creepy incidents that had happened, and they always wondered what Mr. Johnson had been up to.
Once upon a time, there was a young couple who had just moved into their new home. They were excited to start their new life together and couldn't wait to settle in. They loved their new bathroom, which had a large mirror, a bathtub, and a shower stall. One night, as the couple was getting ready for bed, they decided to take a relaxing bath together. They turned on the water, added some bubbles, and settled into the warm water. As the steam began to fill the room, the mirror began to fog up. At first, the couple thought nothing of it and continued to enjoy their bath. But then they noticed something strange. The steam was not dissipating, it was getting thicker and thicker. They could barely see each other through the mist. As the steam continued to fill the bathroom, the couple grew more and more concerned. They decided to try and clear the air by opening the window, but to their horror, the window wouldn't budge. It felt like it had been nailed shut from the outside. They were trapped. Panic set in as they rushed out of the bathroom and realized that the steam was not just confined to the bathroom. The entire house was filled with steam, and they had no idea where it was coming from. As they stumbled blindly through the thick fog, They tried to find a way out of their home, but the front door was also sealed shut. The couple's desperation grew as they searched for their phones to call for help, but the steam was so thick that they couldn't even see their hands in front of their faces. Suddenly, their stomachs started to twist and turn, as if something inside them was expanding. They doubled over in pain and began to feel as if they were going to be sick. To their horror, they vomited out thick plumes of steam, and as they lost consciousness, they realized that they were being consumed by the very steam that had trapped them in their home. The fate of the couple remained unknown, and their house remained shrouded in a thick, ominous steam.
Timmy was a big fan of the superhero Spider-Man. One day, he wore a Spider-Man costume to a costume party. While at the party, he caught a glimpse of another guy sitting in the corner by himself, asleep. Timmy thought the man must have been drunk and had fallen asleep. The man caught his attention because he was also wearing a Spider-Man costume. They were the only two people wearing Spider-Man costumes at the party. Timmy walked closer to the sleeping man and examined his costume. He found that the guy's costume was in really bad condition. There was a huge rip on the left shoulder and 2 holes on the right legs. The costume was also quite dirty, and the guy looked like he had just been beaten up. Many places on the costume were damaged. Timmy grew uneasy and went into the kitchen to tell the host of the party about the sleeping man. The host was curious and walked to the corner with Timmy to check on the man. However, to Timmy's surprise, the man was gone, and they couldn't find him anywhere. After the party, Timmy took an Uber home. He was quite drunk from the party and fell asleep in the car. He was suddenly jolted awake by a sharp pain on his face. Timmy realized he had been punched in the face. When he opened his eyes, he saw a man had pulled him out of the car and was punching and kicking him repeatedly. Laying on the ground, Timmy screamed in horror and begged the person to stop hitting him. Eventually, the person started talking. It turned out that the Uber driver knew Timmy very well. Timmy had borrowed a large sum of money from the driver, but he had never paid him back. The driver had tried calling and visiting Timmy several times, but he always managed to avoid him. Eventually, Timmy changed his phone number and moved to a new place, and the driver had lost all hope of getting his money back. As Timmy stumbled into the Uber car in his Spider-Man costume, the driver recognized his voice and suspected that he had finally found Timmy. He drove Timmy to an empty parking lot and removed his Spider-Man mask, confirming that it was indeed Timmy. Fueled by anger and frustration over the unpaid debt, the driver pulled Timmy out of the car and began punching and kicking him mercilessly. Timmy begged for forgiveness and admitted that he would return the money he owed the Uber driver. The driver took Timmy's new phone number and address and finally let him go. Timmy stumbled home, with many wounds on his body. After he washed his bruised face and looked at himself in the bathroom mirror, he suddenly felt uneasy. He noticed that his Spider-Man costume had a huge rip on the left shoulder and 2 holes on the right leg. It was also very dirty with many other damages. He realized that his costume looked exactly like the one the other guy was wearing at the party. The damages on the costumes were exactly in the same places. Was the guy at the party actually Timmy himself? Did he travel back in time to warn himself about the Uber driver?
It was a late night in the office, and the only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. Sarah, the receptionist, was finishing up her work before heading home. As she got up to leave, she noticed that the old typewriter on her desk was typing by itself. The keys were moving up and down as if being struck by invisible fingers. Sarah was terrified and tried to approach the typewriter. But as she got closer, the typing stopped, and the office fell silent once again. She assumed that it was just her imagination and decided to leave the office immediately. As she walked towards the exit, she noticed that the coffee machine in the break room was making coffee. It was strange because she knew that it wasn't plugged in. She walked closer to the machine and noticed that the coffee was hot and steam was rising from the cup. Sarah was confused and frightened by the weird events happening in the office. She quickly grabbed her things and ran towards the door. As she turned the doorknob, she heard a loud thud coming from the reception desk. She turned around and saw that the typewriter had fallen to the ground, as if someone had pushed it off the desk. Sarah was too afraid to stay any longer and ran out of the office, slamming the door shut behind her. The next day, Sarah told her colleagues about the strange events that had happened the previous night. They laughed it off and said that she was just tired and imagining things. However, they soon realized that something strange was happening in the office. Every night, the typewriter would type by itself, and the coffee machine would make coffee without being plugged in. Strange shadows appeared on the walls, and strange whispers could be heard in the halls. One night, a group of colleagues decided to investigate the source of these strange happenings. They stayed in the office after hours, and as they were walking down the hall, they saw a shadow moving on the wall. They followed the shadow and saw that it led them to the old storage room. As they entered the room, they saw a dusty old diary lying on a bookshelf. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the room, and they heard a voice whispering in their ears. The voice was coming from the diary. It belonged to the previous owner of the office, who had died in the building many years ago. He had a passion for writing and had spent countless nights typing away on his typewriter and sipping coffee. The diary contained his unfinished novel, which had been haunting the office ever since his death. His spirit had been unable to rest, and he had been typing away on the typewriter and making coffee, hoping to finish his work. The colleagues decided to read the diary out loud, also added an ending to the story. It took them almost an hour to finish reading. When the ending was read, they saw a ghostly figure materialize in front of them. It was the ghost of the previous owner, and he had a grateful smile on his face. With his unfinished novel now complete, the spirit finally found peace, and the strange happenings in the office stopped. The colleagues were relieved and grateful to have solved the mystery, but they never forgot the chilling experience of the haunted office.
Once upon a time, there was a carpenter named Tom who worked tirelessly day and night to provide for his family. He had a passion for woodwork, and his saw was his prized possession. One day, Tom was hired to renovate an old house in the outskirts of the town. As he was working, he noticed an old lady staring at him through the window. She seemed angry and resentful, but Tom paid no attention and continued his work. As the day went on, Tom noticed that his saw was missing. He searched everywhere, but it was nowhere to be found. He assumed that he had misplaced it somewhere and decided to continue working with other tools. The next day, Tom resumed his work, and the old lady continued to stare at him through the window. Suddenly, he heard a strange noise coming from the attic. It sounded like someone was using a saw. Tom was puzzled and decided to investigate. As he climbed the stairs to the attic, he noticed that the door was slightly open. He pushed it aside and entered the room, only to find the old lady standing in front of him with his saw in her hand. She had a sinister grin on her face, and her eyes glimmered with madness. Tom was terrified and tried to grab his saw, but the old lady swung it at him with immense force. He narrowly escaped the blow and stumbled backward, hitting his head on the wall. The old lady continued to swing the saw, and Tom realized that he was in grave danger. He tried to run, but the old lady was too fast. She chased him around the room, swinging the saw relentlessly. Tom's heart was pounding, and his breaths became shallow. He knew that he was going to die. Suddenly, he saw a flash of light coming from the window, and he heard the sound of sirens in the distance. The old lady stopped in her tracks and looked outside. Tom used this opportunity to grab his saw and run towards the door. As he ran down the stairs, he saw the police arriving at the scene. They had received a call from a concerned neighbor who had heard the commotion. The old lady was arrested, and Tom was rushed to the hospital. The incident left a deep scar on Tom's mind, and he never worked alone in an old house again. He learned that some tools are not only dangerous but can also lead to horrifying experiences that he would never forget.
A girl named Jean works at a hotel as a room cleaner. One day, while she was cleaning a room, she saw a suitcase lying on the table. The suitcase was not closed properly, and it had a small opening. As Jean was wiping the table, she unintentionally peeked into the suitcase and saw a lot of money inside. She then found a small note by the suitcase that said, "Please help yourself." Jean felt a little uneasy and didn't want anything to do with the money, so she quickly finished cleaning and left the room. The next day, when she went to the same room to clean, the same suitcase was still there on the table, still not completely closed. Through the crack, Jean could see that the money was still lying inside the suitcase. However, she saw a longer note by the suitcase, and her curiosity got the best of her. The note said, "I see you. Feel free to take some, I am fine with it. Please give half to the needy. Pay it forward." As Jean was reading the note, she heard the doorknob turning. The hotel guest was coming back. When the door opened, a bald guy was standing at the door. Jean quickly went back to cleaning and pretended that nothing had happened. The bald guy seemed nice and told Jean to take her time cleaning before he walked into the bathroom. Jean quickly finished cleaning and left the room, trying to forget about the suitcase with the money and the note. The next day, when Jean was getting ready to change into her housekeeping uniform, she opened her locker and found a large bag inside. She was surprised because her locker was locked, and she didn't know how someone could open it and leave something inside. When she opened the bag and looked inside, she was shocked to see a lot of $100 bills in it. She froze and didn't know what to do. She immediately thought of the suitcase with the money in that room. Then, she found a note that said, "I was given a large amount of money by a stranger. The stranger told me the money is mine now, but I need to share half of it with whoever needs it. He also instructed me to tell the next person to do the same thing. Please accept this money, but give half of it away." Jean read the note but didn't know what to do. A week later, Jean saw a news story on TV about a wealthy man who had been sick and had just passed away. Before he died, he gave a large amount of cash to a random stranger, but told the stranger to give half of the money to whoever needed it and to tell the next person to do the same. Jean looks at a bag of money sitting on her kitchen table, thinking who is in need of money. Will you be the next person receiving the money?
In the quiet city of Millbrook, residents are being terrorized by a highly intelligent coyote that has been seen wandering the streets at night. At first, the sightings were dismissed as the occasional urban wildlife, but as more people began reporting encounters with the creature, it became clear that something was very wrong. The coyote appeared to be different from any other coyote people had ever seen. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural intelligence, and it seemed to be watching people with a sinister curiosity. As the weeks went on, reports of attacks began to surface. The coyote would come out of nowhere, launching itself at unsuspecting pedestrians, biting and clawing with a ferocity that left people with serious injuries. People in the city began to live in fear, barricading themselves in their homes at night and avoiding the streets at all costs. The city council held an emergency meeting, but no one had any idea how to stop the coyote. It seemed to be unstoppable, appearing and disappearing at will and attacking people seemingly at random. The police tried to set up traps and hunt the coyote down, but it was always one step ahead. The more it attacked, the more people became convinced that the coyote was not a natural creature but a supernatural one. Rumors began to circulate that the coyote was possessed by an evil spirit, and that it was not a coyote at all but some sort of demonic entity that had taken on the form of the animal. As the months went by, the attacks continued, and the coyote seemed to grow bolder and more aggressive with each passing day. The city became a ghost town at night, with no one venturing outside after dark. The residents of Millbrook lived in constant fear of the intelligent and malevolent coyote that roamed their streets. But one night, a brave hunter decided to take matters into his own hands. He set up a trap, baiting it with fresh meat, and waited for the coyote to arrive. And arrive it did, snarling and baring its teeth as it approached the trap. But as the hunter prepared to shoot it, something strange happened. The coyote suddenly spoke, in a voice that was both eerie and familiar. It begged for mercy, explaining that it had been cursed by an ancient spirit and had no control over its actions. The hunter was stunned, unsure of what to do. But before he could make a decision, the coyote vanished into thin air, leaving the hunter alone in the dark and silent city. To this day, no one knows what became of the intelligent coyote, or whether it was a supernatural entity or just an unusually smart animal. But the residents of Millbrook never forgot the terror that the creature had brought to their city, and they still speak in hushed tones of the night when the coyote spoke.
Once upon a time, there was a man named John who had fallen ill with a cold. He had been staying home for a few days, sleeping and resting, as he had a terrible headache, sore throat, and a persistent cough. He was feeling dizzy and weak and barely had the energy to move around. One afternoon, as he was sleeping, he heard the sound of the front door opening and closing. John's heart skipped a beat as he realized that he was not alone in the house. He tried to sit up and get out of bed, but his body felt too weak to move. He knew he had to hide and protect himself from whoever had entered his home. He crawled out of bed and made his way to the closet in his room, where he hid and waited, listening to the sound of footsteps approaching his room. The steps grew louder and closer until he could hear the intruder opening drawers and rummaging through his belongings. John's mind raced as he wondered who the person could be and what they were after. He realized that he needed to call the police, but his phone was in the living room, and he did not want to risk being heard. He decided to use his smartphone, which he kept next to him, to call the police. The operator answered, and John whispered his address and the details of the break-in, including the sound of the thief's footsteps. The police arrived quickly and searched the house, but the thief had already fled, taking some of John's valuable possessions with him. However, John was quick to capture the thief's image on his phone from his hiding place in the closet. He knew this would be important evidence for the police to find and catch the thief. 2 days later, John received a call from the police, who informed him that they had arrested the thief in a drugstore. The police recognized the thief from the photo that John had taken and had used the store's security footage to confirm his identity. What was even more surprising was that both the thief and the police officer who had arrested him had caught John's cold. They had runny noses, sore throats, and persistent coughs. Coincidentally, they had both gone to the same drugstore to buy cough medicine, and the police recognized the thief and caught him. In the end, the thief was caught, and John's stolen items were returned to him. However, John felt guilty that he had passed on the cold to the police officer. He hoped that the officer would recover soon. Despite the relief of having the thief caught and his belongings returned, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had unintentionally caused someone else to suffer from his illness. He resolved to take better care of himself in the future and to avoid contact with others when he was sick. With that in mind, he settled back into bed, hoping that he would feel better soon and that the officer would be on the mend as well.
There was a new construction site in town, and the crew had been working tirelessly to finish the project on time. But there was something strange about this site that no one could quite put their finger on. One day, the workers arrived to find that their tools were missing. Hammers, saws, and drills had all vanished overnight. The workers were puzzled, but they assumed it was just a prank or theft. But then, they started to see a mysterious figure in the shadows. It was a worker, but no one recognized him. He wore a hard hat and a high-visibility vest, but his face was always obscured by shadow. The workers tried to approach him, but he always disappeared before they could get too close. As the days went on, the strange occurrences continued. Light bulbs would shatter on their own, and strange noises would echo throughout the construction site at night. The workers were becoming more and more afraid. One day, the crew arrived to find that the construction site had been completely rearranged overnight. Materials were moved to different locations, and it looked as though someone had been working while they were away. But no one had been given permission to do so. The workers became more and more convinced that there was something paranormal going on. They tried to contact the authorities, but they were dismissed as being overly superstitious. The crew was on their own. As the project drew to a close, the workers became more and more desperate. They knew they needed to finish the job, but they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. They worked longer hours, hoping to finish the project and leave the construction site for good. One night, as they were finishing up their work, the workers heard a loud noise. They rushed to the source of the sound and found the mysterious worker, standing in front of a broken light bulb. He turned to face them, and they could finally see his face. It was a face they recognized. It was the face of a worker who had died on the construction site many years before. The workers were paralyzed with fear as he spoke to them, telling them that they needed to leave the site immediately. The crew quickly packed up their tools and fled the construction site. They never returned, and the site remained abandoned, a testament to the ghostly worker who still haunted it to this day.